What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 151 on this Thursday, February 6th, 2025. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you. Latest on the recruiting trail. Oklahoma 2026 quarterback prospect was in town over the weekend. How did it go? Got the right guy to ask. Here, in course, the great Collin Kennedy. Yesterday was signing day. We have our full signing day recap. We're going to do our yearly signing day superlatives on the show today. I kind of find a way to wrap up the 2025 class for Oklahoma. And we'll take one final glance at the transfer portal for Oklahoma in the winter as well, as 24/7 Sports had a rankings update earlier this week. Guys got bumped up. What are kind of the takeaways for us in that final rankings update from Oklahoma in the transfer portals? That's all on the program today, a football-heavy show, as it typically is on a Thursday. Collin, let's start with Bowe Bentley, who I teased just a moment ago. We've talked about him the last couple of weeks, 2026 quarterback. Obviously, the dynamic, him and Jaden O'Neal, we kind of got into that a little bit last week. Could Oklahoma conceivably take two QBs? That fed into the storyline of that Bowe was going to be in town over the weekend in Norman. That visit, of course, took place. He was bouncing around. He's at the Lloyd Noble Center for the basketball game on Saturday against Vanderbilt. So I guess I'll just ask you how it went and kind of the latest in your mind as Oklahoma courts Bowe Bentley and maybe takes two QBs. That saga continues to be ongoing. But how did things go with Bowe from what you've gathered?
Yeah, pretty much your simple boilerplate visit talk. It was a good trip. I mean, he had a good time and talked to a couple folks around him. And it sounds like they got a lot out of it. But I think what it really comes down to for me coming out of this visit for Bowe Bentley is kind of the beginning of the exploration here, right? Like you're figuring out what this is going to look like. And I had been saying on our site for a while, this kind of felt like the beginning of everything getting worked through. And so Bowe Bentley, Oklahoma staff, they got to sit down a little bit, talk through some hypotheticals, what was on each party's mind, maybe some next steps. And I think in general, like obviously it was a good visit, but the primary takeaway should probably be it sort of worked through some of the logistics that had to happen in order for this to become a thing. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that Oklahoma and Bowe Bentley are like a definite partnership later down the line. I'm not saying anything of the sort, but more than anything, it was about Oklahoma saying, hey, like, we are genuinely interested in adding you to this class. We know we have a quarterback committed. Here's what we're thinking. What do you think? And then Bowe Bentley countering with some of the similar concepts. Out of it, it sounds like he'll probably be back around Norman in the spring. I know that, and I wrote this in an update on the site, the plan for Bowe was to sit down with his father and to map out a visit schedule for the spring, and I'm expecting the Sooners to get a spot on that, whether that's for just like a spring practice or for the spring game. I don't know, because here's the other thing too that I want to mention. Like I was talking about this with Mike Roach the other day, our 24/7 Sports national recruiting analyst. We were kind of trading intel on Bowe, and we kind of came to the consensus that like this is one of the most unknown recruitments in the country for a high-level player, because not even the player himself knows who's involved with him yet. Like, if you haven't been keeping up with Bowe Bentley recently, this is someone that 24/7 Sports specifically kind of took a shot on, made him a high 4-star player, and now a lot more offers are trickling in. Like around the time that he got that ranking, Ohio State got in the mix, Florida State got in the mix. I think both of those programs want to see him come by in the spring. I believe LSU offered officially just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
We were told around the time that we brought Bowe Bentley down for the Navy All-American Bowl that Georgia was kicking the tires on him a little bit, and it sounds like the Bulldogs certainly are to an extent. And so not even Bowe Bentley has a firm grasp of what his recruitment looks like currently, but he's trying to get all of that figured out. Getting to sit down with OU and working through some of that was huge. And so this is going to be a thing, folks. I would say buckle up. It's going to be kind of a fun ride.
Yeah, no, you read my mind. That was kind of my, as this has become more of a thing, and looking more into Bowe. Obviously, again, we've mentioned it before, but number 11 quarterback for us, number 180 player. Coincidentally, he's one spot ahead of Jaden O'Neal, the quarterback rankings in 2026, ironically, as those two guys are kind of tied together right now. But yeah, I mean, like you said, Florida State, LSU in there, Ohio State, and a number of other Power 5 offers as well. Missouri, I saw, Texas Tech, UCF. Like, it's a long list. Arizona, I think, is in there. Like, this is a kid whose recruitment just seems to be, and obviously you know better than me, but it seems to be just taking off. And, you know, it's just interesting. It's a really interesting dynamic with Jaden. And, you know, could Oklahoma bring him in right now? I feel like is the biggest storyline in Oklahoma recruiting right now. And can they have two quarterbacks? And how's that going to work? If so, like that, it's interesting. We talked about it all last week, but it's just an interesting dynamic. And I'm really intrigued to see how it continues to progress and if it becomes more and more serious. And, you know, again, we kind of talked about it last week, but I presume that if Bowe is good with Jaden already being there, like that's not a factor for him, or maybe it is. I mean, I guess only he could say, but those are the kind of the questions that I guess will become apparent, or the answers will become apparent in due time. But it's all really interesting.
Yeah, I don't even know that Bowe knows. Like, I think the best way to describe it is like Bowe Bentley's recruiting process just started. Like, it's now beginning for this guy. And you mentioned the list of offers, and I want to reiterate it. Like, there are a lot more on the way. All we hear behind the scenes is that there are a number of personnel offices sitting down to watch this guy, figuring out whether or not they definitely want to get involved. And some of those brand names are pretty sizable in nature, right? But in general, man, like I think Bowe Bentley is kind of like all of us on the recruiting trail as well. He doesn't know what's next. He has no idea who his top contenders are. He really kind of feels like he's in kind of the beginning stages of actually figuring out his recruitment. And so it's hard to like shape this from an intel standpoint when the young man himself doesn't even know. But if you're Oklahoma, like it makes all the sense in the world. You know, we've given all these reasons, right? Like he's a huge Oklahoma fan, grew up an OU fan. He's got a lot of talent. He's a proven winner. But on top of that too, like I felt this was important to bring up as well to kind of further why this is a thing. Since we last podcasted, my guy Hudson Standish, who found Bowe Bentley, he's a national scouting analyst for us at 24/7 Sports. He wrote up the scouting report at 24/7sports.com for Bowe Bentley. Yeah. Did you see who the player comparison was for Bowe Bentley?
Yeah. John Mateer. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And it just goes to show you, like, Oklahoma's got more than just the talent and who the player is to go after this guy. Like, they see a perfect fit for what they want to do. They kind of see someone who can basically be the next John Mateer in Ben Arbuckle's system. And that's honestly why Ben Arbuckle came in and kind of started this and led the recruiting efforts here to go after a second quarterback. And so I find it all very interesting. The last thing I want to say, I know that some have asked about, well, how do you get two quarterbacks in today's day and age of college football? We talked about this a little bit with like some of the portal possibilities and the natural turnover you see at the quarterback position. A lot of it does hinder upon what happens with guys like John Mateer, his NFL draft status, Michael Hawkins, what he sees in terms of his path to playing time, the other members of that room, Jet New, and so on and so forth. But I think the other thing that I want to mention that I am now buying into a little bit more, we've mentioned that the 2026 cycle isn't necessarily as talented as some of these other classes.
Yeah.
If that's the case and you're going to take a shot, you're going to go after two quarterbacks, and you've got to, for lack of a better term, figure out a way to budget. Like, I don't know that Oklahoma's going to have to spend a ton of money on an offensive tackle this cycle. That's just a for instance, but if you factor that in, there is a foundation to go and make this situation enticing for both of these signal callers. And if that's the case, you might be able to pull this thing off. I think this is kind of some stuff that's being talked about behind the scenes.
No doubt. It's going to be very interesting to see how it continues to play out. It's interesting. You know, it's an interesting dynamic. And obviously everyone loves talking quarterbacks, and we'll see how it shakes out. Obviously Jaden O'Neal's still obviously very much around, and a guy that we both have talked about many times is someone that we all think can be really good at the next level. And like I said before, I just hope these guys, we've seen Jaden, but I want him to come back in the summer, and hopefully Bowe can come out in the summer. and get to see him. It's just in shorts, but it's still you get an idea. And so looking forward to that. Obviously, hopefully down the road later this summer. From 2026 to 2025. So we backtrack. Yesterday was National Signing Day. Obviously, we had lots of coverage over on the mothership, 247sports.com, the big one, as well as obviously here, Oklahoma-based at Sooners Illustrated. Collin had a ton of signing day coverage. Obviously, they didn't sign anybody new, but it was a good way to kind of wrap up the class and kind of put a final bow on 2025. We're going to do our superlatives today. Now, we did this obviously last February, kind of a good way to wrap up the class and just kind of comb through and highlight some key guys that in particular for Collin and I. We almost did it back in December, but then there was portal and
coaching search.
And so we just like, let's just bump that to when we have a little more time. That time is now. So 2025 Signing Day Superlatives. Let's go ahead and start with the MVP of Oklahoma's 2025 class, the headliner.
You want to kick this one off? You go ahead.
I'm a recruiting expert, so I'll start that way. I can take the super low hanging fruit of Michael Fasusi. Obviously, Michael Fasusi, 5-star offensive tackle. The class is kind of largely built around him. The highest rated offensive line recruit for Oklahoma, and I don't know how long, maybe ever. Certainly, I think of the Bill Bedenbaugh era, and someone that, like I said, you're building your class around, and you're expecting to come in and maybe not right away, but maybe right away be a cornerstone of your offense for years to come. Certainly, a future NFL player is the thought with Michael as well. We talked about it, last week with the final sign day rankings, the number 1 rated offensive tackle in 2025. It's hard to beat that as far as a centerpiece MVP and someone that there was a little bit of drama-ish down the stretch. Could they hang on to him? Didn't waver, stayed with Oklahoma, obviously signed on the dotted line, Collin with his iPhone stream. And here we are. I mean, this is just a guy that everyone's excited about. He's the name of the class. And, I think it says something about him and the level of player he is, and that OU fans who are a smart fan base, that they're this excited about an offensive lineman. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not like he's a quarterback or some hotshot running back or even an edge rusher. He's an offensive tackle that has the fan base fired up. And Michael Fasusi, I think he's a safe and obvious pick here for MVP of the class.
Yeah, look, this class was always going to be judged by its offensive line haul. And we've talked about this a ton, but you really felt like one of those 5-star offensive tackle caliber guys was a must get. Didn't really matter who, but you had to get one. And OU did the right thing and really honing in on Michael Fasusi, because I think of everyone out there, he was the best fit for what the Sooners want to do. And I think the other part of this too that makes him the MVP of Oklahoma's class, obviously it's a huge get at a time where that's a positional need. He is a player at a premium position with every talent trait, character trait in the world. Fasusi's everything that you look for. And we've discussed this at length, but I want to reiterate this again. We're talking about this guy being not only the MVP of OU's class, this is the MVP of a historical offensive line class in 2025. For the first time ever in the history of 24/7 Sports, 9 offensive linemen finish as 5-star players. 8 of them were offensive tackles. And who was atop all of them? Michael Fasusi. So not only is this an elite caliber talent, he's the best of the very best when you're talking about, again, something we've never seen before in relation to the offensive tackle position. So a huge get for Oklahoma, beating some other regional powers too, really had to fight for it. And I think this is one of the bigger recruiting wins for the Sooners over the past several cycles, in my opinion. So now it goes to me. This is the draft process. I got to make a pick. We're entering the war room. And I think there's a couple of different ways you could go here, because if you're arguing MVP of the class, is that in terms of status, positional need, the win in the recruitment? I'm going to kind of blend it, but take a little bit of a different approach here. I'm going to go with Ryan Foje, and here's why. So before the win of the Michael Fasusi recruitment, Ryan Foje became a known commodity for Oklahoma. And that seems like something that, let's just be honest, I think a lot of people, including myself maybe, took a little bit for granted. It shouldn't be. Because if you really think about it, this is why I think Foje's got a case to be MVP of the class. Oklahoma offers him first ever program to give him a scholarship opportunity. They identify this player early on. It doesn't take much longer for him to commit, and he stays solid all the way through his blow up, for lack of a better term. I mean, this guy goes from an early high 3-star grade because there were a lot of promising traits. But as we talk about a lot, the rankings process is truly a process. It's about the long-term development, the updates that come along with more data and film. Foje becomes a consensus elite offensive tackle prospect across the board. Everyone knew this guy. They found out about his talent level. And I think why you have to kind of consider him as the MVP, for him to be an OU offer from the start, make that commitment, and pretty much spurn everybody along the way. Being an elite offensive tackle recruit, I don't think you see that anymore at all. And Foje never wavered. He recruited hard for Oklahoma behind the scenes. He was someone who recruited Fasusi heavily. I mean, Mike would tell you that Foje was talking to Mike just days before his commitment. And I think when you factor in that Oklahoma had to have an elite offensive line haul to pair Fasusi with another elite offensive tackle in Foje, who was with you all the way, it's a massive win in several different layers or contexts. And for Bill Beanbo to go out and put his faith in this guy, and then Foje being the player and the person that he is, sticking with OU all the way through when many other recruits in his position would not have been that case, I think he's got a case to be the MVP of the class.
No doubt. I mean, we talked about it a few times that all the attention's on Fasusi, and completely fairly so. Number one tackle, all that. But Ryan Foje is a guy who is another potential cornerstone piece of your offense. And you look down the road and you can't help but salivate, if you're an OU fan, of the thought of Mike Fasusi at one side, Ryan Foje at the other side, and just going to work with whatever quarterback. Like, it almost isn't, it's exciting. And obviously, like you said, right at the top of this, Oklahoma's offensive line class was going to be what this whole thing was built around. And those are just two ginormous pieces at the top of it. No doubt. You can make the argument the MVP is just the offensive line. Bill Beanbo of this class, with obviously those two guys certainly headlining it. Next one, most day one ready player. I feel like there's probably no question that certainly you or me, anyone that covers OU, gets more often when talking about these guys than who can help right away. Who can come in and make an impact immediately in 2025. You nailed this last year because you said Taylor Tatum, and you were all over that because he was a big part of the offense right away this season. Obviously, saw a number of other freshmen come in and make an immediate impact. Eli Bowen this past season, certainly probably the number one freshman on the team. Jaden Jackson, I guess, would probably have an argument for that as well. Xavier Robinson down the stretch. Who is going to be that guy this year? I'll let you start this time. Guy on this signing class that you think could legitimately make an impact right away in 2025.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, too, I believe we picked Jaden Jackson before the day one ready term. He may have been part of the MVP discussion. I can't remember exactly, but I do know we got Jaden Jackson in a different superlative, and that one paid off, which that was a layup pick back then. But day one ready. I think this one is easy yet difficult all at the same time. To me, there were two clear answers, and I'm going to take my favorite one. I'm going with Elijah Thomas, the absolute stud out of Chakotah, Oklahoma. I fell in love with this player the moment I first watched his tape. I still remember, again, my guy Hudson Standish, we were on the phone talking about some of our favorite prospects. We were trading some intel on tape that has stood out over the week, and we spent like a good 15, 20 minutes talking about what the future might hold for a one Elijah Thomas. And look what happens. I believe he's named Max Prep's Player of the Year in the state of Oklahoma. He's now on campus, and by all accounts, Josh, he's killing it behind the scenes, already kind of cementing himself as one of the best athletes on this team. Now, you want to proceed with caution because we know what the offseason hype can end up doing sometimes when it actually comes time to put the pads on. But I think that the difference between some other guys and Elijah Thomas is like, this is someone who has been there, done that anytime he's gotten an opportunity. I was writing a story about him yesterday when we were kind of doing all the signing day content, how this is someone who once upon a time, Oklahoma was like, do we need to recruit him as a safety? Because he was that darn good. And then even after he committed as a wide receiver, he would still text Brandon Hall and Brent Venables his safety cut-ups, just being like, hey, quick reminder, I'm that dude. And like, I think Elijah Thomas has a chance to essentially say that yet again whenever the 2025 season rolls around. It really feels like of everyone in this class, Elijah Thomas has a chance to make a day one impact.
I should say almost. Our next category, without spoiling it, I almost considered Elijah Thomas for that. I will not now because he came up here at day one ready. I mean, you know how much of a freak you have to be to get a 4-star rating and be a top 150 player in the country at a Chakota, Oklahoma. I mean, little tiny Chakota. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, basically. It's not a program that gets recruited a lot. And not only is he got recruited, but again, he's a 4-star. He's a number 135 overall player in the class. Like you said, early returns have been great since he's been in Norman. I'm with you. And that wide receiver room is up for grabs for guys to step up. Obviously, they brought in a bunch of new transfers, but it's a lot of new faces. It's been nothing but great things about Elijah Thomas. And he's a freak, and we're excited to see him. I'm pumped. He's one of those guys that I'm very excited to see in the spring and see in pads. And the first time we get to get out there for a practice, just kind of what does he look like? And it's exciting. And I'm with you. He's certainly one right in the mix. I would think immediately.
I wanted to mention real quick too. I just feel like the thing that like no one talks about too with Elijah Thomas that I always come back to, and we're getting around this time of year. We've got the Under Armour combines coming up. I'm going to Atlanta this weekend. Dallas is going to be next after that. And dude, like Elijah Thomas, out of all those players there at Under Armour Dallas last year, it was one of the more loaded camps I've been to. Like no one talks about it. He won wide receiver MVP. Out of Chakota, Oklahoma, he came to the Under Armour Dallas camp and beat everybody. Like he has success everywhere he goes, man. I think this guy just doesn't get talked about enough, but he's going to in 2025. There's no doubt.
Great pick from you. I honestly had a little bit of a hard time with this one. I'm going to stick. I think I'm going to stick in the same kind of doing this the roundabout of when you went Foje to Fasusi. I'm going to stay in the wide receiver. I'm going to go with Emmanuel Choice.
Right choice.
6'4", pushing 200 pounds or so. We'll see where he comes in the spring roster. Weight updates are listed, but he's got the frame. You know better than me, but did it at a high level in the state of Texas, which always attracts me, guys who play at a high level in Texas, because it's just as close as you're going to get to college football at the high school level down there in your neck of the woods. I mentioned earlier, the wide receiver room, you have Deion Burks back. Jaden Gibson's come back off a major injury. After that, it is up for grabs. I mean, anyone can come in and make an immediate impact. Obviously, we all think that Zion Kearney's capable of making a big jump. Ivan Carrion did some good things in the bowl game. Obviously, you brought in all these transfers. We like Javonte Gibson, among others. But I don't think anything is set in stone beyond Deion Burks being number one. After that, it's like anything could happen. Manny Choice is a guy. We know, obviously, the Emmett Jones connection, and just he's one. Again, you know better than me, and I want to get your input as well about his potential as an immediate impact. But he just seems like one to me with the frame, the position of need, what he did last year, and the little bit I've seen, highlight packages and things of that nature. He's got a chance to be really good, and right away. It wouldn't shock me if we got to the start of the season and Manny Choice finds himself on the 2 deep. And then he makes a couple plays, and it's like, this guy should just be part of the offense. Like, that would not shock me in the slightest. So I'm going to go with Emmanuel Choice for day one ready. What do you think there as far as his potential to maybe be an impact guy right away?
I think that was the other clear-cut answer, in my opinion, because Emmanuel Choice over the past few years has really shown his ability to grow in a short amount of time. And you have to think that it's going to be more of the same whenever he gets to Norman. This is another one that Oklahoma was the first to offer. Emmett Jones took his shot here, and it paid off in a major way because I still remember coming back to the beat and going to the Lancaster spring game, and Emmanuel Choice was in a sling. He wasn't able to play, but he held an Oklahoma offer. And I think a lot of people at that time were curious about what he was going to evolve into because not a lot of people had seen him to that point. But that day, he didn't get to play, and Nebraska offers him on the spot. I watched their receivers coach go up to him and give him the offer because I think they realized Emmett Jones probably made a pretty good move offering this kid early. And you fast forward, I was talking about this on KREF yesterday. Like Emmanuel Choice, one thing I love to talk about, yeah, he's 6'4", 190. He looks great. I mean, he's going to blow a lot of people away whenever they see him in person for the first time. But I remember like a couple of years ago, there was this reputation that was building around him that maybe he wasn't the best as a jumbo wide receiver handling press man coverage, or maybe he was more of a true possession wide receiver, a big-bodied wide receiver who had to go up and make the play. You fast forward a few months after those kind of storylines were emerging, his first game, he is getting off of press man coverage with ease. He's using his hands to get off the line, and he's beating corners right off the ball. On top of that, he becomes like this extreme yards after catch type in the slot at 6'4", 190. He's catching it and making guys miss with all of those limbs flying around. It's like I turned to Mike Roach. We were at the press box in the Star watching him play. I'm like, this is a totally different Emmanuel Choice, it feels like. And to see that happen over the course of pretty much a year, think about what that guy is going to be able to do during this offseason leading up to the 2025 season. He has every tool and trait imaginable, a great guy as well, getting coached by his dude and Emmett Jones and capitalizing on all of his traits. I think Emmanuel Choice is the other really easy answer here.
No doubt. Obviously with you, that wide receiver combo. You know, there was once upon a time they had, obviously, it was a laundry list of receivers in 25 and getting down to these two, but you got two really good ones here with Manny Choice and Elijah Thomas. Next one, most exciting player. Just like it sounds, kind of just a guy who almost doesn't fit into the other categories that we're just pumped up and I think can be really good. Kind of just an opportunity just to talk about someone that we're fired up about. Like I said, I almost would have – I was leaning toward Elijah Thomas for this, but since he's been pulled off the board, let's see where I want to go. Ironically, we've had 4 offensive players so far. I think I'm going to go defense for the first time. I'm going to go with Trent Wilson, defensive tackle. Trent Wilson, we talked about him a few times. Monster, flat-out monster, just a behemoth of a human. Brett Venables made the joke back on Signing Day in December that he looks like he's 40 years old as a high school kid. And, like, yes, that fires me up right there. He's a grown man. He's a grown man who's in high school, and they don't really need him to come in and do damage right away. The defensive tackle room is in great shape. Obviously, with Jaden Jackson, David Stone back, they got Grayson Halton back, they got Dominic Williams back. I mean, that room, we talked about they might look at a portal after the spring, but that room is in really good shape. So you're not going to be leaning on him right away. If he comes in and, you know, bursts onto the scene, I'm sure they would welcome it. But there's not going to be a lot on him right away. He is someone with his frame and everything that I've heard from his kind of personality, it just seems like Todd Bates, Oklahoma, Brent Venables, like this guy's going to be really good. And I just, and again, not necessarily immediately because they don't need him to be, but in 2 or 3 years, it just feels like future monster potential. He's a monster now, but a future monster potential in the SEC. He's someone that really fires me up. Another one, which I feel like I'm going to say about all these guys, but another one that I'm really excited to see in the spring, in pads, smacking dummies and whatever else. Like I just, you know, he's one that I feel like he kind of committed early and there wasn't any drama for him. So he kind of gets forgotten a little. Just a monstrous human and someone that I'm excited to get a look at here coming up in about a month or so. So he's a big one for me. I'm fired up for Trent Wilson.
I think that's an awesome pick by you. I was not sure that Trent Wilson was going to get into the show, but it's a heck of a move there. You're flashing your GM skills because you go premium position, defensive line, and this is the thing with Trent Wilson. Here's the book on Trent Wilson.
Yeah.
6'3", 270, 6'8" plus wingspan. quick twitch, powerful, high level of versatility, and a grown man in between the ears. In a cycle where Oklahoma got one defensive tackle, they beat out a guy who was wanted by Ohio State, Penn State, and Texas A&M in the worst way. OU gets him. Todd Bates swings this recruitment in incredible fashion, and it stays quiet the rest of the way, which, again, kind of going back to the offensive tackle discussion with Ryan Foje, defensive tackles of Trent Wilson's caliber should not be quiet, but he was. And
yeah,
everyone you talk to in the scouting community, the recruiting community, when Trent Wilson gets brought up, they will bring up the injuries that have happened that have hindered his high school career a little bit. They'll talk about some of the movement, the transfers in high school. But the recurring theme is this dude is pretty much like a giant bowling ball shot out of a cannon. And if you can capitalize on him, you can put a couple pounds on him, there's a world where this guy is an absolute problem at like a 3-tech role in an even front. I think it arguably, again, one of the more bigger wins for OU in the 2025 cycle. The defensive tackle room is really, really good under Todd Bates, but Trent Wilson makes them better. And if you can get something like that out of one guy, huge for OU. I am very excited about Trent Wilson as well. All right, so that kicks it over to me, and I'm also excited about your Trent Wilson pick because you did not take my guy. I am going to go defense as well. We got to show the defenders a little bit of love because this OU staff's doing the right thing and going after more defensive talent. It's got to be Tristan Haynes. It's got to be, right? I think I would be remiss if I did not pick Tristan after he just jumped 101 spots in the race.
Crazy.
Because of how exciting he is, right? I've talked about this a ton. He had every trait in the world, 3-phase playmaking ability, dominates in the high school level, but everyone always wondered what would Tristan Haynes look like against the highest level of competition in the country. And Tristan himself talked about it. I want to show that I belong. I want to show that I'm the next great corner at Oklahoma. And every single time he's had the opportunity to showcase his skill set, he flashes. Had 3 pass breakups over the course of Navy All-American Bowl week between the scrimmage and the game itself, contributed in punt returns. His length, his speed, his frame, that alone builds the excitement. But you see his natural playmaking ability on the ball, his ability to impact the game in the 3rd phase of special teams. Then there's the mindset, right? Like he's just this quiet, calm-natured, really like kind kid, the opposite of kind of your quarterback idea, right?
Yeah.
And I think that feeds into his game. He just shows up and he makes plays on the ball. And when you talk about the growth potential, the traits, the multi-phase playmaking, and then the mindset, it's why, among other things, he jumped more than 100 spots. And I cannot wait to see what he does in an OU uniform, because not only is he one of the most exciting players in this class, he's excited to be at Oklahoma. He's excited to stay in state and put on for his state. In general, I think this was a huge get for Oklahoma. People forget that Notre Dame was very interested in Tristan and made things a little bit interesting. But in the end, they get a really exciting cornerback. And I think this guy has a chance to be a really like electric perimeter defender. I'm excited to see what he does in college.
I'm with you. No, I'm pumped up, especially after what he did in San Antonio. You know, that Carl Albert program, which has been so good to OU. 3 guys signed from Carl Albert to this group to join Xavier Robinson. Obviously did some great things as a freshman last year. You know, just from what he did in San Antonio to build off, because we always known the elite talent is there and the athleticism and all that. But it was always kind of, and we talked about before, at Carl Albert, don't really match up with anyone on his caliber, hardly ever. And Carl Albert went undefeated this past year and never really even got tested. So it was always hard to know, like, how's that going to translate? Like, I don't know. I think he's really good, but who knows? So for him to go down to San Antonio and have the week he did was extremely encouraging. And I've mentioned this before as well. It's silly. I acknowledge it's silly right off the top. But what Xavier did as a freshman, different position completely. But what he did coming from Carl Albert, it kind of makes like it opens the door a little bit. Like, okay, these guys can come right in Carl Albert High School with Mike Dunner runs a phenomenal program. It's also the AD out there. They're good at every sport. It's a premier high school sports department in Oklahoma, maybe the premier. And he comes right into Oklahoma, makes an impact as a freshman, obviously, and the Alabama game and everything. It makes you more excited about the guys coming up. It does. So very excited for Tristan. And, it's cool that he had that great finish. And like you said, that giant jump in the rankings right at the end, fired up for him, and very excited for the other Carl Albert guys as well. I won't say their names or anything just in case they come up in this next segment. Wish they could. But yeah, very fired up for him. Last one, most under the radar. Just like it sounds, kind of a guy that's, obviously like he wouldn't have made it this far anyway, but we wouldn't be saying Michael Fasusi for under the radar. Someone who maybe doesn't get as much talk about as we feel like they should in this class. Collin, you can start under the radar player for you in 2025. Last one.
I'm going to go with Marion Robinson here.
All right.
Here's why I say that. I think that there are a lot of people out there who know Marion Robinson, specifically with Oklahoma's fan base, though. I think when you look at Marion Robinson, this is someone who nationally, maybe not a ton of buzz because it was Oklahoma, it was Arkansas. I know the likes of Oregon and LSU were involved, but it always kind of felt like if he was not going to go to Oklahoma, it would inevitably be the in-state Razorbacks, right? And I think Marion Robinson, whenever he's been in the national spotlight, has shown the type of player that he is. But here's why I say under the radar. Once he committed, again, kind of like some others, it was very quiet for a long time. But this is someone who arguably OU had as top 1 or 2 safety on the board, and they get their guy. I still remember Marion Robinson on Instagram Live, I believe during the Champion Barbecue, showing people around, and OU staff members were in the background going, best safety in the nation, best safety in the nation. And it goes to show you what they think of this player.
Yeah.
Then you fast forward to the fall. Here's why I say under the radar. I think people know Marion Robinson's a good football player. When I got to see him in person this year play against Melissa and Owen Hollenbeck and a Cardinals program that's really darn good, that to me was like, oh, man, Marion Robinson is really, really good at football. And this is the other thing too, man. Like, I'm partial to this pick as well because I still remember stumbling upon Marion Robinson. I went out to Little Rock, Arkansas. I found the picture in my phone the other day. I met Marion Robinson when he was like a high school freshman or sophomore. He had no offers, no opportunities, but my guys out in Arkansas were saying, Collin, this kid is next up. And he was quietly under the radar until that blow up. And now I think it's kind of more of the same. When you're talking about someone who, again, OU probably viewed as one of its top 2 targets at a position like safety, something that means so much to the program, but then the type of talent evaluator that is Brandon Hall, I don't know that we are hyping Marion Robinson up enough relative to how much excitement there is for him inside the program. That's why I think he's my pick for under the radar.
No, it's a great pick. And, like you said, the safety room, Brandon Hall, like, don't question anything with him in that room. I mean, the way that they've brought in guys who have been so fun to watch right away. And like you said, it's a 3-star, prospect from Little Rock, Arkansas. So it's not going to jump off the page to you, but look at the offer sheet. It's as impressive as that. I mean, I'm just skimming it while you were talking. Oregon, LSU, Auburn, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Miami, Michigan, Texas. Like, my God. I mean, just blue bloods all over the place. So really good pick. Excited to see him coming up. That safety room just continues to add talent after talent after talent every year. We're fired up. It's crazy that you can lose a guy like Billy Bowman, a cornerstone of your program, and you look at that room and you're like, they're still in really good shape. It's loaded. It's absolutely loaded. Obviously, RSJ being back to lead the charge, but then all the young guys after him with Peyton Bowen and then Reggie Powers, Boganowski, Jaden Hardy, and now you're bringing somebody like Omarion. It's very, very exciting. I'll stay in the secondary. I'm going to go with Malik Hawkins for mine.
Ooh.
Malik, going back to camp last summer, when we talk about it, those one-on-one drills in camp are set up for the cornerbacks to fail. Okay, there's like 1/4 the number of cornerbacks there as wide receivers, if that. So the same cornerbacks are cycling through and having to go 10 times the reps as the wideouts in the blistering heat and it's just one-on-one, and like it's to hold your own at all is impressive. He was shutting people down, and that was kind of the day when we saw Malik just put in work, and he came back a few more times where it was like it was eye-opening for me. And Malik, really, really talented. Again, just a 3-star prospect, but you look at the lineage, obviously with his dad, and the bloodlines, legacy player. He is someone that, and it's a high bar, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm predicting it, but it would not shock me if he came in, had an Eli Bowen type of freshman season, like came in and got an opportunity, and it was just like, you got to keep that guy on the field. I love what I saw. I love just everything about him. And, that family, getting to cover Mike Hawkins, obviously this year for the first time. If their temperaments are anywhere the same, and I'm assuming with their dad, they're probably close, the work ethic and things like that. He's exciting. I'm fired up for Malik to get here. Like I said, not predicting it because Eli Bowen had a freshman season that's not common. That's not normal. As Brent Venables said before, it's not normal for a freshman to come in and make an impact right away. That's special of those guys to do it. It's not a knock on freshmen who can't. It's special for the ones who do. But it would not surprise me if Malik Hawkins is someone who over the spring is a name that comes up, and that when the games start, again, you get him on the field. That cornerback room is he's got a lot of talent, but it's in kind of a weird place. We talked about maybe wanting to add a portal body. I feel like there's an opening there to getting yourself an opportunity. And he's one that I'm going to be paying very close attention to in the spring and the next fall for me. I'm fired up for Malik.
One of my favorite stories to tell about Malik is whenever we sat down to do his commitment story before he announced it, he had a quote in there saying, "I feel like I'm the best press man corner in the country." And I went, whoa.
All right. Yeah.
Then you move up to that summer camp you're referring to, and I will never forget the violence in his hands,
he's clamping people,
the aggression at the line of scrimmage, and then the recovery speed to get back in phase, get into the hip of the receiver. He was locking people up to the point where a couple of my buddies who are former NFL players who now train recruits in the state of Texas, they were there at that camp. And just to show you, Josh is not lying. Malik was so good, and he was showing some of these traits to the point where former NFL players were coming up to me and going, "Collin, who is that?" And when I said Malik Hawkins, his pops played in the NFL too, they went, "Oh." And so I think Malik Hawkins is so fascinating, man. If you ask me to say what his college career looks like, I don't know. Could he be a corner, a safety, a cheetah? He's got this versatility to him, but I think he's scheme versatile as well. He prides himself in his man coverage ability. I think he can play some zone. I think he can play in the slot. I think he can play up high. I don't know. I don't think there's any limit to what Malik Hawkins can do. And so I think this is someone who I think the last thing to back up your point for him being most under the radar, maybe some people nationally saw him as the take you had to make with his brother being at Oklahoma.
Right.
I think he's shown that's not the case. I think he's got a chance to be a really darn good defensive back.
Yeah, right. Like he's a throw-in because of his dad and that his brother, no, he can play, and excited to see him coming up here in spring ball. I think the first practice is about a month from today, so coming up. All right, so final thoughts on 2025 in general. We talked about it a couple times before. It's a smaller class. They finished just number 17 in the rankings, which is on the lower and obviously the lowest under Brent Venables. They've recruited very, very well. But again, the ranking is a bit reflective, or a lot reflective, of the fact that it's a smaller number of guys, like literal number of bodies. Brent Venables talked about that back on signing day, saying, hey, they had a lot of young guys this past year, a lot of freshmen and sophomore who were impact guys. Not a ton of them left, right? They retained a lot of them. So there wasn't a need to sign a bunch, basically is how he looked at it, which isn't wrong. Your thoughts, Collin, on what they did in 2025 and what this group, kind of the storyline of it is for you when you look at this class and I guess projecting it forward. But what are the kind of the biggest takeaways for you from this cycle and the guys they did finally put ink to paper and will be coming into town here the next either are in town already or will be by the summer?
Well, here's what I want to do. I kind of want to, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I kind of want to kick it to you first as the recruiting guy who's followed this class now for however many years.
Yeah.
For you, what's the storyline that jumps out? Because I think it will be a good reflection of kind of the overarching theme. Give me some stuff that stands out to you about the class.
Yeah, I think honestly, I kind of go back to when we were looking at the day one ready, and I said I kind of was, not having a hard time. That makes it sound like I didn't think anybody was, but kind of looking like where are the positions of need? You know what I mean? It feels like Oklahoma got better at position, like they got deeper and better at positions that are already doing well in this class, if that makes sense. Like that's why the receiver stuck out, because that was the one position that there was some fluidity and, it's kind of up in the air. But it's like I kind of mentioned Trent Wilson, D tackle, continued to progress there. The safety room that you mentioned, obviously with Amari and Robinson, like the positions that are progressing well for Oklahoma, they just added to it. Like they're getting deeper and deeper, especially on the defensive side of the football. That's what kind of stands out to me when I look at the list of the guys is, and I don't know if I'm articulating it well, but they're doing really well at what they've already been good at, which is a good thing. Like they continue to add, and the depth is so tremendous on the defensive side of the football. That's what kind of stands out to me is, we talk about it. You have to stack classes. It can't just be, this year was really great at this position, and then next year you get nothing really of note. Like the ability to build and add safeties year after year, defensive tackles year after year, edge rushers. We didn't talk about CJ Nixon or Alexander Shield Knight or anybody, but those guys, it's like the defensive side of the football continuing to add and get that depth. It's just, that's what kind of stands out to me, especially on the defensive side of the football. Like the positive trend continuing there really stands out to me.
Yeah, I think adding defensive depth is obviously going to be a priority, but the actual execution is huge. And I really do like some of the defensive additions on that side of the ball for Oklahoma in 2025. I think for me, there are a few ways you could go with this, and there's a lot that comes to mind. I think, yesterday on National Signing Day, you can watch this segment if you're interested out there. It's on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, and then I put it on our board as well. But in the segment dedicated to Oklahoma, I did a little recording. It was a 60-second thing of kind of highlighting the top guys. Out of that, the whole discourse of the segment from Emily Proud, Andrew Ivins, Cooper Patagna was pretty much about the fact that Oklahoma, after coming off of a 6-7 season, losing to Navy, did they get better on the offensive side of the ball? Did they do enough to increase their capabilities within a struggling unit? And I think there was a lot of debate about that not necessarily being the case, because I think to a lot of people on the outside, you look at this class and you go, they got an incredible offensive line hole. You can't play a lot of those guys day one yet, though. So is that offensive line still going to struggle? Wide receivers, they lost a ton of guys to injury and then the portal, and there's unproven. I believe Andrew Ivins pretty much led off with the fact that he was wildly concerned about the receiver room, especially coming out of this signing class. And I think that that's furthered by the fact that they lose Cortez Mills. They move past Grayson Harris and Marcus Harris. Torrey Blaylock is added at the running back spot. I can go on. Jet New is brought in the quarterback position. I think one storyline to monitor coming out of 2025 is pretty much what they talked about. Did Oklahoma get anything? Can they squeeze any juice out of this class to elevate that offensive side of the ball, one that's going to have to be much improved in 2024? And I would say specifically, I think that the pressure on these two receivers to be successful right out of the gate, pretty immense. So that's one takeaway. I just believe personally that Elijah Thomas and Emmanuel Choice are going to end up being pretty big hits. I think that this offensive line class, if they stick together and they develop, it's a foundational group for the future of this program. A couple of the quick things that I wanted to mention. I said this on the signing day show on my little video capsule. I don't think you can ignore the fact that Oklahoma comes out of the 2025 class with the top 3 ranked prospects in the state of Oklahoma, all 3 at premium positions and all 3 at positions of need. When you talk about corner in Tristan Haynes, you talk about wide receiver in Elijah Thomas, you talk about defensive end, edge rusher in CJ Nixon. They get the top 3 players in the state. All 3 were around top 150 players in the country too. That's huge. You can't let those guys leave.
Mm.
But then there are also players at premium positions that you really needed to kind of supplement in your program. So I think that's a big deal in 2025. Kind of have to do more of the same, which I think 2026 is going to be a pretty good class in state. And then the last thing that I think is worth mentioning, the whole discussion surrounding this class is like, outside of it being judged by the offensive line and some of the gets and maybe like the impact that's coming out of it, is the fact that it's the smallest class since 2021, which was the class with Caleb Williams. On top of that, Emily Proud brought this up on our National Signing Day show. This is the lowest ranked group for OU over the past 11 cycles. Now, there's nuance to that, like you mentioned, transfer portal, younger players being retained, roster, the turnover that's being forced upon these programs because of the new scholarship cap of 105. OU's had to really be selective in terms of who it brings in, because even before the 105 scholarship rule came out, OU went into 2025 saying we can probably take at most 22. And then the 105 rule drops and they're like, well, may have to be down to 18. And we still need to go and get a lot of guys in the portal because we got to get a lot better with proven experience. OU, not only on paper, the lowest ranked group for the program in the past 11 cycles, which again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily like an undeniable situation. I think, again, there's nuance to that. I'm not saying this is a poor class because it's about the situation that OU is in. But I also think it's worth mentioning this is a recruiting class that finished 10th in the SEC, tying in with a portal class that was 9th in the SEC. OU went out and got, in its selective class, a lot of talent it's very high on, a lot of character fits it's very high on. But a lot of this will be about really maximizing the talent that's being brought in here, because as OU was working through what the new landscape of college football looks like and how that impacts its roster management, right around the Sooners, the rest of the SEC is doing everything it can to elevate along with them. And I think there's going to be a lot to prove coming out of this class. And so I find that to be pretty fascinating, because I don't want to sit here and say, oh, it's a lowly ranked group, because again, I don't think that's an accurate take, but it is important how this class impacts the program relative to how college football is now forcing this class to be a little bit more up to speed relative to former timelines.
No, it's a great point, all of that. It's an interesting group. It is, because like you said, lower ranked, doesn't have a lot of the big flashy players outside of Michael Fasusi, of course, is a 5-star tackle. But, smaller group, like you said, but I do think there's a lot of really potentially very quality players at the next level in this group, obviously. And, like you said, you don't have the 2021 of a Caleb Williams type of centerpiece. They got Jet New on signing day. Obviously, it was an important flip after Kevin Sperry left late in the cycle. Like, they kind of, it still feels like they did a pretty good job, all things considered. But we'll see. With anything, when we talk about recruiting, we'll see. We'll see how it plays out over time. But it's going to be interesting. Interesting group, though. And we kind of close the book on 2025 today. We'll look forward to seeing some of these guys, obviously most of them, in the spring here in about a month. And the ones that we don't see, I think almost everyone enrolled early except for one, maybe two most. So we'll see pretty much everyone coming up here very, very soon. And the ones we don't, we'll see in the summer and into the start of next year. But 2025 signing class in the books. And like we said, a lot of coverage on the signing class from Collin over on Sooners Illustrated. And obviously the 2026 wheels have already been in motion for a while, but they really start to kick up, I think, now for our boy CK here. All right, last thing before we go, I want to bring up earlier this week, the 24/7 Sports Transfer Portal rankings got an update. The number of OU guys saw some significant jumps in said rankings. Want to kind of give final kind of takeaways here before we go. I'll run through the big ones real quick. 6 OU guys in the top 280 of the rankings update. John Mateer, of course, headliner, number 5 overall player in the portal rankings. Edge rusher Marvin Jones from Florida State, number 64. Offensive tackle Derek Simmons from Western Carolina. He's number 92. And then a couple of the wide receivers, Giovanni Gibson and Keontez Lewis, come in at 193 and 271. Also, Kendall Daniels, linebacker from Oklahoma State. He goes in at number 111. They come in number 16 in transfer portal class rankings, which is a solid ranking, but you made the astute point before we start recording. That's number 9 in the SEC, which is crazy. You can be number 16 in the entire country and still be in the bottom half of the SEC is just ridiculous. That shows where this conference is relative to the rest of the country. For you, Collin, what kind of stood out from the rankings update? What were the takeaways or biggest takeaway, I guess, for you from the rankings update for Oklahoma and what they did in the portal cycle? We've kind of wrapped up this cycle a little bit, but what jumped out to you from the portal ranking update?
Yeah, I know that your takeaway has something to do with a particular player, if I remember correctly. So I'm going to leave that one queued up for you. But for me, I did want to mention, I think the easy takeaway is like Giovanni Gibson jumping up 90 spots. I thought that was pretty relevant. Keontez Lewis kind of saw some variation there a little bit. And the guy that you're getting ready to talk about here in a second, he got a sizable jump as well. But for me, my primary takeaway, and I do want to reiterate too, there will be probably another rankings update or two for the portal from 24/7 Sports. I don't know exactly when, but I think it'll probably be around spring ball. That being said, I felt like for me, the takeaway was so much of the portal window was about offense. Like so much of it was going to be made of how they supplemented that unit after it struggled in 2024. But this rankings update to me really showed that OU just still quietly adding quality defensive depth. To go back to your point about the recruiting storyline. Yep. Marvin Jones Jr., you mentioned him. He's up at number 64 overall. That was good for a 22-spot jump up in the rankings. Kendall Daniels, he becomes a 4-star transfer, going up from a 3-star prospect in the portal. He goes, I want to say number 147 in the rankings. No, it was higher. He jumped up.
Kendall Daniels?
6 spot. Yes, Kendall Daniels, number 111, going up from number 147. So rise of 36 spots to 111 overall. That duo, it's important. Like,
I'm with you.
Linebacker and defensive end were serious positional needs for Oklahoma in the transfer window. And you lose a Desan McCullough, you replace him with a Kendall Daniels, and I believe they're pretty much neck and neck in the rankings right now. Last time I looked, that's a heck of a get if you're able to swing someone like Kendall Daniels to not only replace a presence like Desan McCullough, but supplement a linebacker cheetah room that needed a body in a pretty bad way. And then Marvin Jones Jr., man, like I think we've talked about this here on the show before, but you lose Ethan Downs, you lose Trace Ford, you lose Caden Woolard. PJ Adebawore is still developing, and R. Mason Thomas coming back is massive, but you've got to get someone opposite of him to make sure that you're not susceptible to attacks to the opposite side. I think Marvin Jones Jr. elevating the rankings, like both of these guys were players that OU previously was really interested as high school recruits, but that was a different staff. Now, fast forward to today, this staff getting both of these players at a time where they needed them positionally, and on paper, they're ascending talents. I think that was really interesting for me, and it goes to show you that Oklahoma's working to continue to make sure that defense is improving alongside the offense.
No, it's a good point. We talked about it a little bit at the time, but they were able to be selective on the defensive side of the ball, considering that they were bringing so much of the talent back. Love both additions of Marvin Jones and Kendall Daniels. Glad you brought up Giovanni Gibson as well. It feels pretty safe to say right now, and it's February, long way to go till to start the games. It feels pretty safe to say right now that Giovanni Gibson is the most likely of the portal guys to be a big part of this offense. He was wildly productive at Arkansas Pine Bluff. Yes, it's Arkansas Pine Bluff. We acknowledge that it's a lower level, but obviously he had a massive year down there with Pine Bluff. So I think there's a lot of excitement about him. You saw that reflected in the rankings up at number 193. You mentioned it. For me, Derek Simmons at 92 really stood out. This is a guy that we talked about at the time, comes from Western Carolina. And so, again, the natural reaction is this guy's going to come in and make a difference in the offensive line for Oklahoma in the SEC coming from Western Carolina. Everyone wanted this guy, offensive tackle. The fact it was reflected in his ranking, number 92, top 100 transfer in the sport this cycle, was really noteworthy. You know, when I put these rankings out, I had an OU fan reply to me on Twitter and said, Derek Simmons, I was not familiar with your game. That was the takeaway for me, is I think a lot of you fans do not realize how good Derek Simmons is. Like, folks, this guy could start a tackle for you. I'm not saying he will, but he could. Like, he's a completely viable and realistic option. If you put a projected starting 5 out right now and had Derek Simmons at one of the tackle spots, that would not be crazy in the slightest. So that would stood out to me a lot. The fact that he was, after Marvin Jones and John Mateer, who I think are the two centerpieces, the highest rated portal guy that they got. I don't know if many casual OU fans who just kind of keep up the portal, like they know what's in the portal, like they know what OU got, like they're kind of halfway. I don't know if anyone would have guessed that he'd be the third highest ranked guy after Mateer and Marvin Jones. So that really stood out to me because, again, I just feel like he is a legitimate option. Again, I'm not saying he's going to come in and start all 12 games. I'm not saying he's going to be all SEC, but he's a good player, and he could be a starter for you next year when the ball kicks off against Illinois State. Like, I think that's totally viable right now. So that was a big takeaway for me.
I mean, he jumps up 75 spots. This guy is 6'6", 325, has experience playing left tackle, right tackle, and right guard. I could see a world. Yeah, like this guy, I think I talked about him a little bit whenever he committed. Like, you watch the tape and you're like, whoa. And
right.
I'm right there with you, dude. Like, I am now more and more buying into the idea that this guy could find his way into the right tackle or right guard spots. I don't know if I'm going down a rabbit hole. I might be going down the wrong path, but this rankings update really reflects the idea that he's going to compete for starting time. And if not, this is clearly a heck of a depth piece. I mean, like, this is one hell of a way to go get your NFL swing tackle, for lack of a better term, right? Like someone off the bench who can play whatever you need. Derek Simmons was a big get, literally. I think we understood that at the time, but it probably is time to talk about this guy a little bit more as maybe someone who's not only suiting up in OU after playing at Western Carolina, but he might be competing for playing time right away in Norman.
No doubt about it. I think that's it. We'll be back next week. As always, James and Tom will be with me on Monday. We'll wrap up the weekends for hoops and look ahead to the latest football, continue our position stat report series as always. Collin and I will circle back. We'll be back next Thursday, latest on the recruiting trail and whatever else there is to get into. Obviously, we'll get into that next Thursday. CK, appreciate you as always. Safe travels to Atlanta this weekend.
Yep.
Safe travels out to Atlanta.
I would welcome food recommendations from the comments section. The camp is in Carrollton again this year. I had a blast last year. That being said, the drive out there, not my favorite thing in the world. And so if there are any stops along the way from Dallas, Texas to Carrollton, Georgia, I need to know about. I would love to hear from the folks. But we'll definitely dive into what I see out there at Under Armour Atlanta this weekend, because that camp last year was arguably the best camp I've ever been to. And so I'm hoping it's more of the same this time around. And again, folks, we're really diving into the high school recruiting stuff. I'm going to probably do some 2026 talk now that we're through National Signing Day. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to dive into next week on the show.
No doubt. So safe travels out there for you. Scoop out some spots for SEC Media Days in 5 months from now. Be here before you know it. And we'll reconvene next week. That's it for now. I'll be back on Monday. Basketball coverage, obviously, all throughout the weekend as well. Keep an eye out for that on the YouTube channel as well as on the website, oakland247sports.com. Be back on Monday with Tom and James. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway signing off for now. See you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.